I would like to introduce everyone to Eric Kerr-Anderson. Eric is an assistant professor at Winona State University in Composite Materials Engineering program. Eric has his Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering from North Dakota State University and both a master's and a doctoral degree from the University of Alabama at Birmingham in Materials Science and Engineering. His dissertation was studying the effects of ballistic impact on compressively pre-stressed composite panels. Eric went to work for and Eric, I'm sorry if I butcher this, you can correct me. Is it the Celanese Tacona in Winona?
Yeah.
Oh, I did it. Awesome. For 7 years, where he was in research and development, and he decided to pursue education and research by starting as a professor at Winona State University in the fall of 2019. He's constantly trying to find ways to make course content more engaging to students and to close the loop on how they will use the information they are learning in the real world. So with that, I would like to pass it over to Eric.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So what we're going to talk about today is just a couple of ideas basically for you to start trying to bring some of the problem-solving skills back into the Midwest classrooms that used to be there mainly because of us being a rural farming community in a lot of cases. And so that's gone away in a lot of ways. And on top of that, we have Amazon. So next day delivery for everything perfect for the solution, right? And so that eliminates a lot of the problem solving that was done back in the day, where it would be really nice to have the ideal solution, but you had a hammer and a screwdriver and some leftover twine that you had to figure out how to make it work with. And so those problem solving skills, those are what make for great engineers. And so if you have any students that really want to learn how to solve problems and they can do math, I mean, that is what an engineer is. So, all right, let's get started. So I know that this is there's a lot of people that have different ways of talking about innovation and creativity. This is just my way. Take it or leave it. The main bit that I like to think of is that creativity is more or less what your knowledge base is relative to the group that you're looking at. So if you're working with a group and you all have the same knowledge, even if you are incredibly creative, none of your solutions are going to be creative relative to one another, because you're all going to come up with roughly the same idea. Whereas if you have a group of people that have varying skill sets, varying experiences, and the ability to combine those together and come up with new solutions, that's where creativity and innovation happens in the real world. Few people can just jump straight into a solution from nothing. Most adaptations are simply just baby steps that are built on that body of knowledge, or they are adaptations from a different industry completely. So at my last place of work, their biggest jump forward in production was actually because they had somebody come over from the printing industry, so the newspaper printing industry, and they had completely different technology for how they ran equipment. And they just said, well, we did this there, why don't you try that? And it was a huge leap forward. So I mean, instead of having incremental changes of like 5%, 3%, 2%, it was like 300%. And that's how it really happens in the real world. And so it's difficult to create these experiences in a classroom because we're looking at education, right? And education is more lecture-based than experience-based, unless you can create some interesting activities for them. So like we already said, engineering is basically just problem solving. Uh, what I like to think of is that engineers go out and grab whatever knowledge they need from any discipline. Um, we are rather agnostic to say that we can only sit in the chemistry camp or in the physics camp or whatever. It's what needs to be done to get the project done, what needs to be learned to solve the problem, and how can we incorporate that in. And so it's just going out to grab what you need to do just to get the job done. You're not trying to make it 100% perfect. In most cases, you're just looking for what'll do the job, and then how do you make it a little bit better the next time. And so that's the two main camps that engineers fall into is innovation. So people that are just going to build stuff from nothing, or improvement of existing product that is already out on the market. And so when we do talk about this, we look at closed form solutions and open-ended solutions a lot for engineering. So in the design world, we're typically looking at open-ended solutions. However, most of the content that's taught at a school level is going to be closed form solutions. And that's mainly because there's time constraints on the actual time that we can have for class. It is easier to evaluate those, and it's easier to learn. But the open-ended solutions, I mean, you potentially have infinite solutions in that case. And you really need to know as much as possible about this in order to provide feedback and provide guidance. And that can be a little bit scary for a lot of professors and a lot of educators. But it's okay. In a lot of cases, just with the design world, you really have no idea where you're going. I mean, I used to work in a research and development group. We were at the edge of the known body of knowledge. You know, there wasn't any path to follow. There wasn't anything that we could just go read a book and jump to the next place or talk to somebody. We were exploring new things, and what we learned along the way, that led us to learn new things. So the reason I have this topographical map over here is that when we do look and explore different areas, if this is the highest peak over here, but we have another peak over here, and we're looking to get to the highest point, and we start off with a guess that is over on this slope, we will look down and we'll say, oh, it goes down. And then we'll look up and we'll say, oh, that goes up. So we can walk up to this point. But if we didn't open up our minds enough to begin with for the design process, we miss this other hill over here that's a lot higher. And so if we do spot explorations to begin with, we can see where the slopes are relative to one another, essentially, and find that best possible solution. So, all right. So with that, I was hoping everybody could have a paper and a pencil ready. We're going to do a little group activity, if that's all right. Can I give everybody, 5 seconds to get a paper and pencil, or do you need more time?
Sounds good.
Okay, so what I'd like you to do is I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and I want you to write down as many green vegetables as you can think of. Go. Okay, by my count, that's 30, so let's just stop. How many people had more than 10? Anybody?
I did.
Okay. Anyone else have more than 10? So we have, okay. What was the highest number then that everybody had? So a lot of people had 6. 8, 10. Okay, so the point behind this is not necessarily how many you had, but this is a 30-second brain building challenge that you can actually provide for students. The idea behind this is that as you were writing down things, it should have been really easy to write down the first few, right? Because they were right on the tip of your mind. But then all of a sudden you hit a point where you had to stop and think. And so your pencil stopped, and then it wrote down the next thing. And then it stopped again, and then it wrote down the next thing. This is actually your brain exploring and trying to find new connections with what you already have existing. So when you do this kind of activity, this is a way to create connections with different aspects of what's already in your memory, and turn it more into that on the tip of your tongue memory, right? You don't want to do this with topics that are Brassica family. Is that what this is? Okay. You don't want to do this with topics that are too narrow. So you want to have some nice broad topics so that there's a lot of things to talk about. But you also don't want to let students just languish for a long period of time. And on top of this too, is that if you do this multiple times, your brain will start hurting from this. It doesn't seem like it would, but it won't take many of these activities to bog down students and make it a little bit more difficult. And so this is an activity that I used to do a lot of. I really liked it, and it can get down weird paths. You can always ask students what topics they want to do. And again, you do want to pick them rather broad, just so that nobody does one and then just stops for the next 30 seconds. But another options out there for just being creative and tracking typically is if you track your ideas in a journal. There are a lot of people that have different thoughts when they're doing either repetitive tasks or no mind tasks. And so some people have things that just tumble around in the back of their heads, problems. I've had some just do that for years without me knowing, and then all of a sudden there's a solution. And it usually happens around the time of either showering, or if you wake up in the middle of the dream, right, and you write that down, or if you're out mowing. I have a lot of grass, and so I mow a lot. And so I have a lot of ideas that come in mowing now. But there's other things too that will just spawn ideas. So it's a good idea just to have a journal handy so that you don't forget that idea. We can also list random fields and pull one of them from the hat to learn more about that from the internet. If you like looking at YouTube videos, this is a great way to learn and find new channels that have a lot of interesting content. The more you separate yourself from the pack, basically, and the more different experience sets that you have, even if they're just surface knowledge, it can take you down different paths, because you may know how a joint works for a piano spring hinge or something, and that seemed to work better in this design than this other thing. So the other thing that I really like is crafts, but that's just me. So I like doing crafts. I like teaching students that are crafty people that can do math. Active listening is a really important part of this as well. You do have to listen because other people have insights that may not necessarily be exactly scientifically the right words to use, but if they see it all the time, they may have more insight than you do because you're not there looking at that thing all the time. And so if you listen and interpret and think through what they're saying, you can get some really, really good insights as to what could be possible solutions. You can always look and try and be a little bit more curious as well. I often just kind of stop and think and wonder why we have these these different aspects of the world as the things that they are. The latest one was actually at the new YMCA here in town in Winona. They have a children's playground inside, and I was in there with my kids, my little ones, and it was amazing how much design principles went into just the design and build of that. They had it purposely set up where if you weren't big enough, you couldn't get to the higher levels with the more dangerous equipment. They had it perfectly set up where all the little zip ties were tucked in around things. There's a lot of features that went into it, and they're not noticeable at first until you start digging into it. So, and then just finding interesting things. Those are all things that you can do to kind of broaden your knowledge base. As far as the design process goes, there are a lot of forms out there, but it basically boils down to these steps. So when we are designing a part or a product or something for industry or for customers or anything else, we start off with just really focusing on the constraints. And I know that seems silly because you go to brainstorming after that. But if I were to say, make me something that makes money, most people would not have a good idea of where to go with that, right? It's not as easy as saying, make me a new bicycle frame that can support X amount of weight and go this fast. So that would be then still allowing you to do a bunch of brainstorming, but it's gonna focus your attention on some of the key parameters. So then after that, we just go through and we evaluate our designs. We do some research. We try and fast fail as quickly as possible. It is entirely okay to be wrong and to find a way not to do a solution, right? It is a good thing to learn how not to do something because those are the expensive mistakes. And that's part of building up your base of knowledge, and also just that tenacity that you need to go through this process. And so then after that, we've got prototypes, test and research. And if it's good enough, at that point, you just do a final build. But if it's not going to work exactly like you want it, you take the information that you learned from that and you go back through the process again. And you do it again and again and again and again. And those are the basic principles behind engineering design. So when we are looking at open-ended problem-solving loops, we do want to start off by defining the problem, okay? We want to be really explicit. And so there is no rule breaking in this unless you actually establish that there was a rule, right? If someone thinks around the setup that you put in, that's a creative solution, okay? I remember we had a rat trap race at one point where everybody had to use a rat trap to propel a vehicle. That was the design challenge. One group created a catapult and shot a little race car, a little micro car. Completely broke the premise of the rule because you're actually supposed to make a vehicle that is powered by a rat trap, right? But that wasn't what the design constraint said. It said propel. And so the vehicle wasn't the rat trap, it was this other little micro car. So that's fine. But you'll learn through this as you do some more problems, and you can kind of create extra rules as you want going forward. Additionally to this, you could provide some examples of preferred optimal ways to start with, and then just remove those from the table. And then this would get you back to trying to figure out how to engineer a solution that is less optimal, but still something that works. You give them some time to actually figure out some solutions, and then let them talk through those after everything's over. So if you do have some problems getting people going, again, just keep in mind that there are no bad or wrong solutions. There are just solutions that don't meet the goals of the project. It's okay for people to try things. It really is. It is not a problem. It shouldn't be considered silly or anything else. On top of that, you could do some strengths and weaknesses. So if you had several different components, right? And you could talk about, well, this works really well to hold things. You know, you talk about tape or clothespins or something else, right? Or you could talk about how knots work, you know, show them how that would work, or what slips well, just different aspects of the items that you have. And then on top of that, if you really wanted to, you could do a secret skill card, okay? And so that would be where every single student has their own little bit of information that nobody else has. And this is a way to differentiate that knowledge base again. So if you wanted to give them more time to think through stuff, you could always set up the problem on a Friday and then actually do the activity on a Monday or Tuesday, or give them some extra time. Or do part A and part B, or come back to it again. So this goes into junk drawer problem solving. So if you don't have a junk drawer, congratulations. If you do have a junk drawer, it's probably very different from everybody else's junk drawer. And if you don't have one, just talk to somebody else. There's a good chance that if you talk to 2 other people, you'll find somebody with a junk drawer. So the nice thing about this is that it is a random accumulation of things. And there's gonna be some basics in there, right? A lot of office supplies probably. And so there's probably some things that are gonna be pretty constant, but every year it's gonna change over. So you probably have some different solutions that come from this. But the idea behind it is that you essentially set up a problem. So in this case, let's say that we have a hanging light. And so all I've done here is I've taken a coat hanger and a flashlight, and I've duct taped that flashlight to a coat hanger or attached it in some way, okay? And then I'm gonna take 2 chairs. You might need to put some books on this if you have a pretty heavy flashlight, just to keep the chairs in place, but everybody should have chairs. You can use other stuff too if you need to. Have a string, tie a string between those 2, and then have a target on the floor. And that target could be like a coaster, or I don't know, a piece of paper that you cut a circle out of, or something, right? Anyway, you put that off center. So the problem is that you want the flashlight to point at the target. And naturally, it's going to go to the center in between the 2 chairs. So now with the junk drawer, you provide the students with a whole bunch of items, just random household items or not so random household items, really depends on what you have. And they have to walk across a line that you put down, maybe just some masking tape or something on the floor, or just say that crack right there, you have to stand behind. And then they can go in and they can grab whatever items they want and modify the setup so that when they walk back across the line, the light is touching the target, okay? Now in this case, I'd love to talk to the people that move the target to the center, or take the chair and move it over so that it's lined up with the target, right? Those are good solutions. Once those solutions are there though, you take them off the table. You say, okay, you got that. You can't do that again, okay? Also with the items. So if they take out a roll of duct tape and immediately come over and duct tape this, this coat hanger in the right spot, you say, good job. And you take the duct tape and you set it aside, and they can't use the duct tape anymore. So then they have to go down the line and find new ways of doing things. The way to close this loop then is to give them time afterwards to figure out a solution and suggest materials to go into the junk box for next time. There's a lot of ways that you could solve this problem. I mean, you could tie knots. You could have, for some reason, I keep on thinking of those monkey chains, those hanging monkeys, right? But you could do a lot of different ways on this. So another option could just be as simple as having a marble on a sloped surface. So in this case, we've got books and I don't know, maybe a cutting board or a bigger book or a plank of wood if you have that. And literally all the goal is to keep the marble on the board when you drop it or something like that. And then you'd have to build up some type of wall that would prevent the marble from falling through. You could do this with tracks. You could do a lot of things on this. If that ball is magnetic, you could have magnets underneath, right? If it's not, you could have wire that's magnetic that you make a cage around and have magnets underneath. There's a lot of different ways that these things could go. So it's really up to you on how you want to set up a slightly unrealistic problem and just going with that for the solutions. You'd be surprised with some of the solutions that those students will come up with. So this is essentially Rube Goldberg stuff. So if you want to look up Rube Goldberg experiments in Google, you'll get some chuckles off of that and also probably some good ideas. Also video games. So for this presentation, since it was going to be saved, I made the challenge of only using the icons that were in PowerPoint to make all of my pictures for the slides. And so this would be a bird game where they shoot birds at pigs. I don't know, it's pretty popular a while back. So depending on what the students are liking for that time frame, I mean, there's a lot of games that are flash games that are free, that are essentially optimization games and problem solving games. So if you wanted to kind of create something that was unique and interesting to them at this time, I mean, this is an opportunity to kind of do some of that bonding. If you do want to get a little bit further into electronics, you could have some light sensors and do something like portals where you have like a light sensor here and an LED light that pops out down here. It depends on what you want to do with that. There's a lot of options when it comes into Raspberry Pis and Arduinos. So yeah. Other things out there, if anybody comes to you and says, hey, I have some money, what's the best way that I could spend that to increase STEM in the classroom? You should really look at Kiwico. They have some really innovative, interesting things out there, both for parents, just for students at home, and also they are selling bigger boxes and kits, and they're not terribly expensive. They're not nothing, but they're not super, super expensive. But they would do things like use syringes with tubes in between and fill them with fluid so that you could plunge over here and then it would actuate the plunger on the other end. And then if you set it up right, you can actually create a robotic arm that works just off of water power with syringes, which is a very unique solution. And so they have several things like that. So it's worth looking at. Also, Arduinos, tons of options out there. There are a lot of great resources and solutions that are already provided. So if you do have some technical students, some students that already have some programming skills and aren't afraid to play around with or break electronics, there's plenty of opportunities out there already for a lot of things that'll be very close, and then you can tweak them. In addition, Taskmaster is a funny British TV show. I enjoy it. It's basically just they grab a bunch of comedians and put them in strange situations and make them solve problems with not good items to solve problems. So exactly what we're talking about. And they come up with some interesting solutions as well. And of course, they're comedians, so it's funny. 3D printing assemblies. Thingiverse is a great place for that. It's a website that it's a compilation of a whole bunch of people's time and effort that they post printed assemblies or printed items that can just be downloaded and printed on a printer, on your printer. You don't have to do any of the CAD work along with it. The downside of this is that there are some age appropriate or age inappropriate items on there, because it is a bunch of adults posting things, and so you might want to do some screening ahead of time before you let your students search on there, because there's some stuff you probably wouldn't want them to get at. So on top of all of that, there's something called matchstick puzzles. I don't know if anybody's seen those. If you haven't, look them up. There's plenty of opportunities out there for problem solving with using either matchsticks or down here. You could do it with paintbrushes or bamboo sticks or tongue depressors. It's all the same skill set. Basically, you just need to have a bunch of uniform items, and they have puzzles where if you move one, then it changes the pattern. And so there's lots of really good puzzle solving opportunities with those matchstick puzzles. On top of all that, you can reach out to an industry professional or a tradesperson to bounce ideas off of, or you can talk to me. I wouldn't mind talking to anybody. So yeah, with that, does anybody have any questions?
Well, we will, if there are no questions, we will post this slide deck and any additional resources from Eric to the STEM Forward page.